been able to do on my own. God stopped the waters of the Jordan River a long way up. I'm told, this is in our lesson book that I have here, the city of Adam that was referred to in verse 16 was probably the city of Tel Ed Damelia. I probably mispronounced that. But it's miles upstream from Jericho. And because it was so far upstream that the waters were stopped, there was plenty of land that was dry for them, all of these people, probably 15 miles of it that was dry for all these people to get across. God provided a miracle. Another lesson for them is the Canaanites didn't need to be feared as long as the Israelites were following God. God would empower them and give them the victory against any foe, against any obstacle that they faced. Has God demonstrated that power in your life? He has mine. I just shared that with you. Most Christians, if you ask them, they would say, yes, I believe God can do the impossible. But when it comes down to it, they don't often take those steps into the water. And there are times that we want something done, that we think that it ought to be done, and yet God doesn't do what we're hoping that He'll do. So what do you do then? And by the way, that's a lesson from last Wednesday night in our Bible study. It's online. It's on Facebook and our YouTube channel. Look at it. God didn't do what they may not have done what we expected Him to do. And God may not do things the way we expect Him to do it. But we need to trust in Him. And that brings us to our final truth of our lesson tonight. And that is God wants us to remember what He's done for us. Joshua chapter 4 verse 10 is packed with significance. What should have taken place a whole generation before this was finally being accomplished. The work that begun under Moses continued under Joshua, but it was the same God who guided them both, the same God who's alive today, the same God we serve. Throughout all the failures of the people to keep His commands, God was patient. God provided the leader the people needed to carry on after Moses died. God knew all along what would be necessary. And God equipped and called the right person at the right time. Just as God had known that the people would need Joshua, God also knew that they would need His continued patience as they struggled to remember all He'd done for them. These events were momentous in the history of the Israelites. And it was fitting for them to mark this with a memorial. Now, if you read, Joshua commanded one person from each of the tribes to go into the middle of the Jordan River and grab a stone, a big stone, not a little rock, but a big stone, and carry it out. And he would pile them up and make them up as a memorial for the people to teach the next generation. When the next generation came along, they would look at this big pile of stones and they'd say, why is that there? And it gave them an opportunity to share what God had done and how God had blessed. We need to do things like that. Not make a big monument. That's not what I'm saying, but we need to do things like that in our lives. As I shared with you one of mine a while ago, we need to make those in our lives. The purpose of all of that was to be a reminder to the people. It was so significant that it was recounted twice within a single chapter. By the way, that's the way they did things in biblical times. They repeated it to make sure that we remembered, that the people remembered. I believe it's very important for us to remember what God has done for us in the past. Those things in the past, He's prepared us to go forward for the future. And as we remember what He's done in the past, it will give us the strength and the faith and the knowledge that, yes, God can do this. And if it's God's will, He will do it. God knew that the future generations would need to be intentionally taught the lessons. He knows that we're forgetful people. He knows us better than we know ourselves. He knows our tendencies. He knows that we will always need Him and that we will always need to remember who He is and what He's done for us. We need to be intentional in sharing that with our next generation as well. Remember it ourselves, but then share it with the next generation. Thank you for joining us. I hope that God has used this lesson to touch your heart, to touch your life. And so as we do this, as we close this lesson, I want to remind you of our service Sunday morning. Come early for coffee and donuts. Come early for fellowship. Maybe you might have a story you'd like to share, the way I shared one of mine tonight. You're welcome to come and share it. That's a great time when we're just all sitting around talking. Share what God's done in the past with you. Thank you for joining us. Now I look forward to seeing you